Today I'd like to share with you a series of stories about my background, pivotal moments, and how things came full circle in my career. It's my hope that these stories will inspire you to believe that no matter what your dreams are, and no matter what twists and turns come your way, as long as you're willing to innovate and reinvent yourself, anything is possible. Because my career has taken me into the world of music for video games, I thought it would be best to start with some of my earliest memories of where music and video games came into my life. So this is me, 9 years old, playing the piano. My mom was my piano teacher. I vaguely remember her not giving me dinner unless I practiced for 30 minutes. This is me on one of my favorite Christmas mornings, 1980, getting my Atari 2600, the first video game console I ever owned. I was absolutely fascinated. 1985, I got my first synthesizer, the Roland JX3P. I remember the first time I heard a synthesizer, I was absolutely blown away. By the time I got to high school, I quickly earned the reputation as the keyboard guy. I played at all the school dances and talent shows. I even did demos for kids in the neighborhood who wanted to record their music. I subscribed to all the electronic music magazines and quickly realized that my dream was to be a record producer like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and other producers like Trevor Horn and Mutt Lange. These guys were my musical heroes. They did the music that I loved. Over the years, thanks to the support of my parents, I slowly accumulated more and more equipment. So by the time I got to college age, my studio looked more like this. You know, when I see this photo, it brings to mind a conversation I was having with a close friend of mine. We were hanging out, and he was imagining, wouldn't it be amazing if sometime far off in the distant future, all this equipment can be contained in a single box? Of course, I thought he was crazy. That friend is now a theoretical physicist, by the way. Hello, Greg. In 1989, I started at NYU. They had a new program called Music Business Technology. And because I was already so busy writing and producing music, I decided best to go part-time. About a year later, I was introduced to a gentleman named Danny Lamel. Danny Lamel was formerly the music director for Rick James, and at the time, currently music director for R&B pop star Bobby Brown. We hit it off famously, and we got together several times in his studio. And he was really impressed by the way I used all the gear and I knew my way around the studio. And then he asked me a question I'll never forget. He said, "Tom, how'd you like to go on tour with Bobby Brown as our keyboard tech?" 20 years old. Speechless, exactly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said, "Oh my God, yes." So about a year later, it actually happened. Here I am on tour with the band and Bobby Brown. It was my job to listen to all the albums, create a shopping list of all the synthesizers they would need for all 5 keyboard players, program every sound in every keyboard, and make it so that during the concerts, when they wanted to play a certain song, they pressed one button and all the sounds would switch to one song. And if anything went wrong, it was my job to run out there and fix it. Which brings to mind another story. We were on Saturday Night Live, and 30 seconds before we went on, 30 seconds, the band is starting the set. And the keyboardist starts waving his hands frantically because the keyboard wasn't making any sound. He's looking at me. So my life passes before my eyes, and I just run out onto the stage, pulling things out, plugging things in, and I'm like, okay, this sound's coming off stage. I run off the stage, I see the sound module is all glitched out. There was a surge to the MPC building. Everything was messed up. So I unplugged things, plugged it back in, called up the sound, 5 seconds. He started hitting it, ding, 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 it worked. 4, 3, 2, the show went off without a hitch. I remember after that show, vividly, Danny Lamel, the music director, came up to me and he said, "Tom, tonight, you just kept your job." So Touring was great, but several years later, I realized, my heart was really in wanting to be a producer, so I went back into the studio. So all throughout the 90s, I'm working on all kinds of music you can imagine, with all different kinds of artists, varying degrees of success. Some albums, I actually had one that I co-produced that went gold. It was great. It was a good time. I really got a great education doing all kinds of different things. I was also introduced to a very famous DJ in the 90s named Junior Vasquez, who brought me some amazing opportunities to work with him on some remixes for some of the biggest artists like Whitney Houston, Peter Gabriel. I even worked with Cher on her last album. In the 90s, though, the technology, I don't know if you remember, was a bit slower than it is now. Even getting an email was like a big event, with that famous sound.
You've got mail.
Also, my days were structured around a FedEx schedule because in those days I had to work in person with people. And if I had to send something to someone who wasn't with me, I'd actually have to make the 6 p.m. drop-off deadline so they'd get the music the next morning. Video games were still very present in my life in those days. I remember I got married in 1997, and the night before my wedding, all my groomsmen were over at my house, and we're playing Goldeneye on Nintendo 64. So in 2001, though, lots of things changed in the world. New disruptive technologies came on the scene, file sharing went mainstream, and services like Napster and LimeWire led to music piracy. Music started to become devalued. I also started to feel this creative restriction in the narrow confines of what pop music was becoming in early 2K. The music industry that I grew up with, I saw it starting to crumble before my eyes, and along with it, my dreams and aspirations to be a record producer. But music technology was very, very exciting. We started seeing the world's first software virtualized instruments. Not hardware synths, but actual software synths that sounded just as good or better than the real thing. That far-off dream about this studio in a box starting to become a little reality here. In video games, it was no different. Innovation was exploding. 2001, Microsoft released the Xbox, and I was playing games like Halo and Prince of Persia and Rainbow Six. Absolutely amazing games. Pure escapism. Then I started noticing something very interesting. The music. It resonated with me. I'm like, this is so cool. And that's when I came up with an epiphany for me. I remember it was an instant. That's it. Video game music. Of course, it combines the two things that I love the most. I need to be making music for video games. But where do I start? And that's when the seeds for reinventing myself began to be planted. So now we had this thing called the internet, and I started doing research on it. And I found out there's this conference in LA called E3 where all the big video game companies would show off their latest and greatest games. So I'm like, perfect. I'll just put together some music, video game style music, print up 100 CDs, fly out to E3. I've worked on tons of albums. They'll welcome me with open arms. Except it didn't quite go that way. No one really cared about some new wannabe composer with no game credits. They didn't really care what albums I worked on. So I came home pretty discouraged and scared with about 100 CDs. What am I going to do now? I had a wife, a 1-year-old, and a mortgage. And I had to figure out something fast. The more I reflected on my experience at E3, the more I started to get the sense that, new composers, weren't really perceived as cool. But recording artists, they were cool. There was a certain mystique about them, like Chemical Brothers, Crystal Method, Prodigy. And that's when I came up with perhaps the most innovative and crazy idea of my entire life. Why don't I just reinvent myself and become a recording artist? No one knows me anyway. Kind of like the whole Bruce Wayne Batman thing. I kind of get in the door that way as an artist, and then after I get enough game credits, take off the mask and be like, hey, I'm a composer too. Let me score your game. It was a crazy plan and the best one I could come up with. The plan? To create an entire album of electronica perfectly suited for licensing in games, TV, and film.
As some new artist no one has ever heard of.
I'm a firm believer in persistence. One of my favorite quotes is by Calvin Coolidge, talking about how if you have enough persistence and determination, anything is possible. That day, I decided to form my record production company, my music production company, and call it Persist Music. As far as this artist name, I came up with Atlas because it's my last name backwards, Salta, and plug, which is the opposite of unplugged, because unplugged is like acoustic music and plugged is like electronic. Plus it rhymed with the novel Atlas Shrugged, so I just thought it sounded cool. I decided I really wanted to memorialize this time in my life, so I decided to name the album 2 Days or Die. Because if things didn't turn around fast, it was all over for me. But if this crazy plan actually did work out, I'd always remember what I had to go through and always carry a sense of gratitude for any success I might have in life. So I hired a graphic designer. We worked on some cool imagery, cool sci-fi artwork, and Atlas Plug, 2 Days or Die was born. I signed with a publisher, and then an amazing thing happened. Microsoft approached my publisher, heard the album, and wanted to license 4 tracks from the album in a new video game. So this plan is actually working. So I finished up the album as fast as I could, and in 2004, I had my first video game placement, Atlas Plug in Rally Sport Challenge 2. And then another amazing thing happened. Microsoft was working with Volvo at the time on a historic commercial that would be the first in history to ever use video game graphics to advertise a real car. So Volvo heard the music in the game. They heard this one track. They said, we want to use that in the commercial. Just so happened it was one of my tracks, the title track, 2 Days or Die. This is what the commercial sounded like.
When it starts showing up in video games, don't let the needle-pushing T5 turbo performance mess with your mind. It's still built like a Volvo.
Now you know why they used video game footage. Thank you. So that's how it started. That year, Atlas Plug started showing up in numerous video games, including Crackdown and Project Gotham Racing and Fast and the Furious. Then I got an agent, and I started getting the opportunity to pitch on games as a composer. And over the years, I was fortunate to go on to score many games, including some of my favorite and dream titles like Prince of Persia and even Halo. The plan actually worked. The dream actually happened. Thinking back to Prince of Persia, that was one of the first projects I ever worked on where the available technology that was newly emerging had a direct impact on the composition. Listen to this music. And imagine this. The ethnic wind player you're hearing, Sandro, was in Sweden. The vocalist, Judith, was in Italy. The percussionist, Bashiri Johnson, was in Brooklyn. And the cymbalom player, Michael Maisley, was in San Francisco, as well as other artists that appeared on that album, like Azam Ali and MC Rai. Directly, this never would have been possible without these new technologies. High-speed internet also allowed for real-time recording sessions. And I'm not talking about just with like soloists. I'm talking about like with entire orchestras. So here's a footage from an orchestra I worked with recently on a game called Killer Instinct. They were in Macedonia. I'm in Connecticut. And I'm communicating in real time with the conductor and my collaborator, Clayton, who is in Detroit. That's a keeper. Pretty remarkable stuff, the way it came together. Technical globalization also started bringing my record production aspirations and merging into my game world. For over a decade, I've been working on a dance game called Just Dance. I'm asked to do hit song recreations, but also create original songs in all sorts of styles, some of them very crazy in all different languages. I'm able to work with musicians all around the world. And now, thanks to this technology, the players themselves share their experience playing the game by uploading videos of themselves. So I'm able to enjoy hearing my songs being danced to around the world by all different people.
Yeah, here we go, start the show. All you gotta do is just dance.
And the music also made its way onto the crime drama series Ray Donovan.
Come on. It's like that boxercise thing you do.
You just can't make this stuff up, folks. Remember that far-off dream my friend was thinking, the studio in the box someday? Well, this is what my computer screen looks like now. Every piece of dream gear I could possibly want has been virtualized into software instruments and plugins. Quite literally, a studio in a box. Due to the fortunate timing of when I decided to get in the game industry in early 2K, I realized that none of it really would have been possible for me to do without these technologies. Not only was I creatively unrestricted, but I could have a worldwide client base and work with anyone, anywhere, at any time. Innovation in technology, yes, it did force me to reinvent myself, but it also enabled me to get into an industry that I absolutely love and pursue my dreams. I hope that all of you are able to embrace innovations in your life and embrace the opportunity to reinvent yourself and pursue your dreams. Thank you.